welcome to Searching for Mana, Gio.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on the show. Fuller introduction, Jyothish Nair of McKinsey and Company, who is VP and Associate Partner. We are very excited to have Joe on the show because a lot of the trends that we picked up on from leaders in the space over the last half year have been that companies are more and more using agile methodologies, design techniques to increase creativity and actually, in effect, increase the bottom line of revenues in their business. And Joe has a background traditionally from the arts, creative background, and now, of course, is in probably the most notorious strategic consulting business on the planet. So we will do a bio where we understand the serendipity of your journey. We will cover the difference, the nuances between digital design, and we will also get your extreme vantage point on the trends, the macro trends that you've seen happening over the last few months of COVID. We're in July 2020, so of course we're going to have to discuss some of that stuff. So I just wanted to also acknowledge that we have Mimi Nguyen of Mana Labs on the show also. So Gio and Mimi know each other and have fascinating conversations on design and all of these type of things. So there will be parts of the show that will be better if you two have that discussion. So just to finish the introduction, I just wanted to give some context. McKinsey and Company were founded 94 years ago. They have offices in 127 countries. They have 27,000 employees, and their revenues as of 2018 were 10 billion plus. So great work, all going very well.
Thank you. I'm just one of the cog in the wheel.
But a crucial one, and ever more crucial. So super excited to have you on the show. Could you give us an understanding of what you're doing at the moment in McKinsey, please?
So right now, I'm officially the associate partner, where I work with a number of designers within the studio. So when I say studio, the studio has service designers, graphic designers, communication designers, storytellers, and then data analytics. And then at the extended studio, which is outside of our London office, we have studios plotted in Stockholm, in Berlin, in few hubs across the Europe, right? So there are some industrial designers, product designers, and a combination of basically interdisciplinary designers. So I've worked with them. So that's primary piece. And then the secondary piece is I've worked with business leaders within the firm. When I say business leaders, partners and senior partners who are responsible for client impact and work with clients in understanding what the problems are and how do we take some of the clients' problems and how can we start to kind of look at it more rigorously from both qualitatively and quantitatively. So one of the things that's really important for us to look at both from both angles and then develop user-centered strategies. That's what I do.
So you very much have many facets of the business, but from what I'm appreciating here, almost a hunter and gatherer nature, where there's partners and senior individuals with their network who are perhaps industry specialists, and they're understanding which companies need solutions. And then you have internally all the different type of skills that you just listed that you're working across, where in essence you're coming up with the solution. And of course, there will be cross-pollination internally. If we could understand, and I know McKinsey are deadly serious about their responsibility to be discreet with who they're working with, of course. But if you can paint the picture of perhaps something you're doing right now.
Yeah. So what we do is we work with clients hand in hand in understanding some of the problems that they have. When we say problems, for example, in today's world, if you're looking at right now, COVID has struck, and how do we get back to business? How do we help some of our clients to think through that problem?
Yeah.
So tangibly, if you think about it, what does that mean from a safe reopening? What are the steps that you need to put in place? So we help them do those, achieve those. From a short-term point of view, how can we get you up and running from a safety point of view? And then we help them think about, okay, now that's just part of one part. Now, second part would be, now there's an opportunity to actually reset and transform and think about your business from the ground up.
Yeah. So you should do this for the government right
now. See, we would probably help if they come and knock at us the door. But then primarily what we do is we use design as a methodology, at least where I sit. How can we use design as a way to think through this problem? What it means is, how do we think about people, put people at the middle of any sort of problem solving, understand what the needs of the people are. So when we work with clients, we actually try to understand what their end users or customers are going through, and unlocking that and understanding their unmet needs is crucial to any sort of near-term safe sort of an opening or long-term reset, reimagination of their business. So it's important to think through from a design angle. What is that design angle? What does it really entail, and so on and so forth.
So for me, it sounds a bit like you're implementing design thinking into solving wicked problems, issues of your clients, which actually sounds a bit like traditional consulting, but they never used design thinking before. So when I was in Accenture, we would say, okay, we're trying to help clients with the issues, and we're coming to solve their problems or to find the purpose of the next transformation and things. But then, so when I was actually, for example, in Accenture, I was at the same time studying at the University of Arts in Warsaw, and it would never come to my mind that I could continue this art adventure and staying in consulting. So my background was before in the economic school, and everyone was dreaming about going to McKinsey, like every student. And you really wanted to be a consultant. But back then, 2012, you wouldn't apply to McKinsey with an arts certificate, with the arts bachelor. So can you give us, like, how did you get from also an art degree, but now you're associate partner in McKinsey?
Look, these are all my personal views here, okay? So I just want to upfront and let you know that. So from my personal journey, if you ask, art is an integral part of design, if you think about it, because it involves aesthetics, it involves a kinesthetics aspect of anything to do with design. But my personal journey, if you will, let's see, back in 90s, I studied art in India, and mainly it was sculpture, painting, printmaking a little bit, and occasionally some art history programs, and that's about it. But then at that time there was this view that how can our artists be doing anything to do with commercial? Like forget about it. There's no space for it. So throughout that process, what I encountered something called advertising at that time, right? So started working in small advertising agencies, came across how to make artistic sort of work for publication and communication purposes. Over time, I did that, but it didn't interest me. Advertising really absolutely bored me to a point where I felt like it's not truthful. You're forced to sell something that's not true, and I couldn't stick to it. So I left advertising and I moved into design. And I was fortunate to have met at that time a lady called Sujata Keshwan. She ran a very successful design studio in India, and then it was sold to Brand Union at later stage. So I was one of the earliest designers. I worked with Sujata. She basically became my mentor, and she was Paul Rand's disciple. So I was like fortunate to learn what she learned from Paul Rand, for example. So that's how my design career actually started, from an art to getting into design, and then structurally ever since then, over the last 20 years, I've constantly focused on design. But then design has moved on from just being a normal design to something more commercial. How do you make design relevant to businesses in a commercial context? That's how it's turned. So that's basically, in some sense, that's my journey really, in today's context.
But then, how did you end up in Barclays
Wow,
from being a designer?
Yes, that's so. I was working for one of the most successful, still an independent design studio called Native, which is around the corner from here near Shoreditch. I was working there as a global creative director and helping shape some of the physical and digital experiences. And then after 2 years of my work there, almost 2 years, I decided to try something out new. And then during that time, financial industries were just trying to look into a slightly different direction. It's not just an analytical direction, it was going into a direction where how can design start to play a role? Because there were various financial products, but then it wasn't greatly designed, if you will. So you didn't have Monzos of the world, you didn't have Revoluts of the world at that time. So I looked at it, I'm like, well, there is an opportunity to design something new. So a friend of mine got me into Barclays, and I was fortunate to have worked with some absolutely amazing minds, people like Rob Brown, Derek White, who went on from there to head up BBVA. In fact, Rob is now the CMO of BBVA. So I worked with Rob in establishing what it is to look and innovate within the financial industry, and particularly inside out rather than outside in. So we came in, we started to innovate, start to work with different types of products. So I was involved in what it is called first Fintech accelerator in Europe. So I was involved right from start. So right now it's called Rise platform within Barclays. So I was piloting right from the stages of piloting. I was involved, getting that out, and projects like Bing It back then. It was at the start of the new products.
If you think about Ping It, so for example, it's like taking a design thinking approach, and you're thinking, okay, what is the thing that the user really needs? So for example, when I was sitting there, I was like, I really want to send my friends money, but I don't want to ask for a bank account. And looks like, okay, if you take a design approach, you think about this issue, and then, okay, let's do Ping It. So you can just ping your friend using a phone number. But this hasn't been adopted as well as Monzo. So I think 4 years later, the whole country started to ping Monzo each other money using phone numbers. But the solution existed before, because I remember there was Ping It before. It was just not as well adopted. So how you would now, in reflection, comment like why the Ping It didn't happen as big? Why didn't grow as big as Monzo, for example?
Yeah, maybe it's important to recognize that we're talking 10 years ago. Some of these banks, big brands, were going through a huge flux, and then when I say huge flux, end users, end consumers, i.e. retail banking consumers, always were on the fence about these big banks. So any products that were designed and released by these big banks, there was this little bit of healthy skepticism existing, or existed, or still exists if you think about it. As opposed to, if you think about 6 years ago, there was this thing called challenger banks, and they came along and they challenged the status quo of these big banks. What it means is big banks did work, but then people didn't favor them. And if you think about it, just think about a mortgage. If you wanted to do a mortgage at that time, it would take you 6 to 8 weeks to get a mortgage application in place. How are you going to even win customers or win people's hearts? It's impossible. And when in this time of when I'm painting you that time and that era, it's not far away. It's just like 8 to 10 years ago. It's changed at such drastic speed when challenger banks came, because at the core you were looking at how do I take some of these micro services and then speed that up for users. That was the key, right? And then convenience. So hitting on that convenience aspect really shot up, as opposed to big banks. They couldn't do it at that time. Although some great ideas were on the table, great innovations happened, but it never saw the forefront because at the ground level, technology implications were a lot higher.
Is it also because, and this goes back to perhaps strategic consultancies and McKinsey's success, that a small, well-synced creative team can challenge better than a large organisation? So your options become, set up, get a load of money so that you can push it out, innovate. And then there's just one proposition. So it's like, okay, well, if I really appreciate great design and I would like somebody working on making my banking experience quicker and better, then I'll gravitate over here. So we've got the early adopters. And then if you've got, in this instance, Barclays, they're abreast of the innovation that their customers would like, but they have to quibble over the bottom line. The bottom line is very good, actually. So it's like, well, for this thing that would compete with the challenges that are going to take 7 years to get there, and then bureaucracy slows it down, right? So then, to a consulting view, is that where the approach works, where a McKinsey would, for instance, be consulted with? And then what I'd like to understand is, do they keep that project stealth away from the core business? Are they trying to replicate what a startup is doing?
It depends, right? If you think about it, there are ways you could possibly. We have something called Leap, right? At the firm. I mean, it's there in public domain. Leap is where we help companies look at some of those type of things. If a big corporation comes and they want to do a new product or a new service, we kind of find a way to help them take it as a separate piece of business and then help them really accelerate, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
the advice typically is take it as a separate piece of business.
We don't advise that, right? So I would suggest
offer it up as an option.
Possibly, if it makes sense, right? If it makes sense.
Specifically, so my question is quite narrow. If you're trying to disrupt and be on the cutting edge of a user experience, then we're trying to understand, are small teams better?
So traditionally, from large teams, the way we are thinking about it, or at least the way we're structuring the teams out there, looking at how can teams have blended skills, or team members have blended skills. So, for example, if you look at a service designer with a spike around UX UI, which is quite rare, and then sometimes you get a service designer or UX UI designer with a spike in coding as well, which you would have never expected someone to have 15 years ago. 15 years ago, you would have a traditional information architect You would have a content designer, you would have a graphic designer, you would have a art director, 4 different skills in a team on top of your leadership. Here, right now, what we are saying is the world has changed so much. In today's context, you don't need those 4 different individual skill sets because you get those blended in people.
Why do you think that's happened?
It's really around 2 things, right? One is over the years, the application of design and digital has really accelerated. So over the years, how do we understand from the traditional system to getting, spiking your skills up so that you can start to blend into one designer with 2 skills. That's one side of the angle, right? From a practitioner standpoint, how do you bolster yourself with 2 or 3 skills to get ahead? So from a design point of view. Now, if you look at business angle point of view, 15 years ago, staffing 4 people to do a website would have costed you about $1 million or dollars generally. And over the years, it's completely changed. The reason one is technology driven, because you have faster editing tools. You don't need to traditionally structure it in a way where financially it's not viable. But in today's world, you cannot technically structure it because it costs you twice or 3 times more than what you would ever budget for from individually if you look at those. So having people with blended skills are a lot better, both from getting the work done at the same time from a financial viability of a project.
Joe, let's say that we took money out of the equation here with a blank checkbook, and we just want to produce the best website in the next few months. Would you choose the 4 best individual skills sets coming together for that project, or would you choose one individual who has that blend of all the skill sets?
Good question. I wouldn't. It's not quite black and white of that nature, right? So it's not like 4 different skill set and then forced into one. It's definitely, I would support interdisciplinary kind of an approach, but then looking at what the problem we are trying to solve. If it is just a website, it depends on what is the website about. It's about, if it's a newspaper type of a website, then you will need a skill set slightly different from you building a automobile, e-commerce website.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's just following on from your example, which is really clear that many years ago the technology was so slow that a practitioner had to stay in their one discipline, and so you'd have to bring the different disciplines together. So it made me think, well, actually, yes, technology is speeding up, but also the real innovation here is that the cost has gone down. But actually, if we still think today there's progress to be made, if something's incredibly complex, then we need more people in the team to complete the jigsaw puzzle. Whereas if it's quite simple, the benefit of technology and individuals now being skilled across various skills is that actually somebody can do a lot more. So if we were to make predictions moving forward, and I would just pose the thought that you of course go into as much detail as you want. Will that keep happening? Will it get to a point where one individual can keep on not only doing what today would take for 10 people, but also then broadening out to something that's much more of a complex product as well?
I think it's important for us to recognize that how skills are changing and transforming. It's important to recognize that from a pattern point of view, if you look at it, 15 years ago, designers were not asked for coding skills. Simple as that. And today, if you if I were to hire someone today as context, I would think about, it's a plus point. If you say to me that you have prototyping skills, I would be like, okay, what kind of prototyping skills do you have? Do you have a prototyping skills to use InVision? There's this kind of an app. Or do you have prototyping skills of a bit of HTML and Python and a bit of JavaScript?
And the latter being preferred.
Latter being preferred, I would suggest, in some sense. But then I would also suggest it doesn't mean that you don't have the skills of just normal prototyping, that is quick iteration. Because if you think about it, HTML, JavaScript, all those can complicate your prototyping in a way where it can take time. So if you're thinking about quick iterative way of learning from users, creating a product or a service, putting it in front of people and getting responses from them is crucial, right? If in the process of design. Now it's how do you break the balance? So from a skill set point of view, for me it's a positive asset if you have coding skills. Now it doesn't negate the factor that you have to quickly iterate and test and iterate and test. So it's almost like a mindset, right? You can put your coding skills in one side, but you also have to think about it. What is appropriate? If I have to test, literally, I'm creating a design solution now, and then tomorrow I need to test. I don't have time to do HTML prototypes. I'm sorry, we don't have. So how do we do that without that? So it's a balance between both. But to your point, from a skill set standpoint, I would always lean towards the latter.
Yeah. So this is something that Mimi studies and researches. Certainly, some of the trends that we're coming across suggest what I was trying to kind of tee up there, which is whether it's consultancy going into a large firm, whether it's a large firm getting a product right, or whether it's a challenger, time and time again, it seems to come back to when the individual, what I call inner scorecard, connects with what the opportunity is.
No.
And so in that instance, if somebody's able to, okay, I need to visualize it, I very need to quickly just prototype this, right? I'm going to share it with my team, we're going to quickly then go on to the next iteration. These things start to make sense why it works also then in a smaller team. So they're the two trends that we're really picking up on.
Yeah, so for me, when you mentioned the mindset or having these coding skills, it goes back to my research now when I'm seeing that the issue in the interdisciplinary teams, it's the communication issue. So when you have a software engineer that is clearly just a software engineer and designer that is very, very artsy, they just cannot communicate. Yes. But the same with the business side. When, going back to Accenture, I had issues when people were thinking that I'm crazy in Accenture when I was showing them artsy things. And like, I don't get it. Yeah. But I think when you have blended skills, it helps. Even if you're a designer, you know coding. You don't have to code, but you understand the coder that you work with. Yeah. So you know what's feasible, what is not feasible. So I don't have high expectation, and I show him a visual and I say, you have to code it like this. And he would say it's impossible. But if you don't have blended skill, you would not trust him, you would not believe him. But by having blended skills, so you know a bit of coding, you understand his mindset, his language, it's easier to communicate and build something together. That's kind of
both for you guys are this example of having a creative and artistic background, but also an economic business background, which seems like is fortuitous and obviously choreographed for your own success. But let's just take that out of the frame and think about recommending to the audience how you could get this blend. Because it seems to me like, right now we're moving forward, a fantastic one to have.
Yeah, it's... Look, design, if you think about it traditionally, design cannot exist in isolation. Let's put it this way. If you look around anywhere, whether it's a brick and mortar space or digital or any sort of experiences, it involves design. And it involves a certain rigorous way of looking at users' problems and then redesigning and reframing the whole, experience. Now, at the end of the day, the difference between art or artisticness is that art could be more a way to self-reflect, and it doesn't have any repercussions. It might have repercussions, don't quote me on that, but it's more of a self-reflection in that sense that, I could produce a piece of art and get away by saying it's my piece of art, and whether you like it or not, you don't have to consume my art. It's fine, as opposed to when you're thinking about design, you're doing a service to someone else, and someone else is going to use your product or service, which is where the business angle comes in.
Absolutely. So Joe, that's like, album one of an indie band can be incredibly good to a niche audience. And then as they get more successful and end up in some type of stadium rock where it's just like one extended chord, it has broader popular appeal, but is rubbish. I'm thinking it through. So again, back to my point, all of these findings make me think that the trends are much like with data science. People didn't know what a data scientist was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And then this became the rock star role, right? And then right now, everybody's talking about machine learning and artificial intelligence, which in essence is very much data cleansing and using data science, right? This was theorized 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Of course, the technology is catching up.
Yeah.
Lots of interesting conversations around automation. Feels to me like, I'm not saying art for one's purpose, but the consideration of a product and then thinking from a design engineering perspective, what does the customer, as Jeff Bezos would say, want, is everything in a digital future, which I think we all agree on. How can you go about making sure that you're fit for purpose in the business world to strike that balance?
I think it's important. There are not many designers right now who actually spend that time or thinking through how it impacts from a business standpoint. So if you think about traditionally in the art colleges and design schools in UK, certainly I don't know about US, but in UK, there's this absolute surge for creativity and students are coming out very talented, very super individuals, right? Very good designers. Now, what often happens is they are not trained to think about the repercussion of any design at a scale, So as a designer, it's our responsibility now to think about, okay, if we put something in people's hand, it's not just about because people desire it, I'm going to give you that. It's no more that. You need to think beyond that. So what does that mean? It means is how easy it is to manufacture. Now, in a physical product design, you will think about colors, materials, finish, scale, manufacturing processes, etc., etc. In the digital world, you're going to think about how many people are the users, what is the scale of the usage, and what's the context of usage, and so on and so forth. So you have to blend, as a designer, you have to work your skill around who are your target audience and particular target audience, niche audience, and how many are there, and what is important for them, and how do we quickly test and learn some of your design solutions, and then actually frame it back to the business and technology owners, for example, saying, hey, listen, there are 5 things users want, but then 2 of them are critical. Without those 2, your business cannot stand. And that kind of mindset, usually designers are not encouraged or taught in schools at the moment. So we really have to focus on, from a design point of view, how do you help designers think through business, and how do you frame them in the context of, I'm not talking about profit here, I'm talking about adoption,
Yeah.
And adoption equals something else, which is obvious. And so how do we get people to adopt a solution is very, very much designer's responsibility rather than anyone else or along with everyone else.
And my question is now about the other side. When you said these students are coming out from art schools and they're not really having this business mindset, trying to think about production and scalability. What about the business world? So McKinsey had this report with McKinsey Design Index that is showing that implementing design methodologies, approaches will increase revenues for businesses and shares value for the stakeholders. How do you see is the sector? So are other businesses, as you say, telecoms, pharma, finance, are they ready to welcome this design approaches? And the report is kind of calling out on that. So do you see a changing trend? Do you see now businesses are more open-minded for implementing design methodologies, and how is it about kind of the skill set in the company itself? Like, are people hiring designers now more, and what is the trend?
It's a great question. So I think it's going to take time. Right now, if you almost look at Fortune 500 or even 1,000 companies, if you look at them, how many of them have chief design officers, so to speak, at a C-suite level? You have CMOs for pretty much all of the firms. You have CIOs, and probably the firms who are more tech enabled and technology focused, even non-technology focused, have CTOs. Chief digital officers, this new thing that's kind of people are there, but then CDOs, chief design officers, or chief experience officers, how many are there? Barely few. You get a handful of them. It's quite slow right now. If you think about it, it's part of our collective as designers. For us, and design thinkers and design and business sort of catalysts. We need to think through how can we help companies understand the value of it, right? So when I say value of design, so the way I see the value of design is broken in 4 pieces, right? One would be analytical leadership, and one would be cross-functional teams, and then this notion of continuous iteration. You need to iterate constantly your products or service, and then the 4th one would be build world-class user experience, which those are the 4 critical things that companies needs to think about. So whether it's a Fortune 500 or even a smaller mid-sized company, they need to focus on how can we use these 4 facets, and then really think through what would that mean to the bottom line of the business. And in some sense, it's like, how do we help adoption? How do we help users adopt products and services that these companies are focusing on? So I wouldn't lose the plot of those 4 facets. And so what my recommendation would be for companies to think through these angles, and then quite seriously think about it and reflect, and then put frameworks together in terms of how do we quantitatively and qualitatively analyze the return on investments. So let's make design speak for itself. Let's put designers in the positions and responsible positions where they actually can reply, saying there are KPIs attached to the design process, and what are the KPIs? Rigorously get them to become responsible for that and get them to deliver to that. Now, which is not happening in the traditional firms. It's happening at COO levels. It's happening at CDO levels, chief digital officer levels, but not at a design, because it's so hard to quantify. It's how do you quantify someone emotionally? Feels like doing. I feel like swiping left and right and so on and so forth. How do you quantify these kind of interactions? From a design point of view, because that's how we are measured. But then what I'm saying is we need to be systematic about it. We need to put processes in place where design becomes equal voice on the table to deliver KPIs, I would say.
So if we think about the companies who are structurally set up like that, then they will have been primed to take the opportunity over the last few months in the COVID environment. We wanted to ask you about some of the macro trends you're seeing and on top of them, in fact, even working on at the moment.
I think from a macro trend, it's nothing new, right? Everyone are experiencing this problem around how do we get on and how do we start reopening our businesses. So from a trends standpoint, we see that generally people are getting comfortable with the way we are operating right now. So it's quite whether one likes to believe it or not, nobody would have thought that 6 months ago, if you said, you need to come and develop the solution. And especially as a designer, doing ethnography is key to our process. So, going into people's homes or natural environments to observe, talk to them, understand their needs, passively observe what they're doing, and then glean onto some insights is absolutely critical for any kind of a designer, right?
Why is that? What do you extract from that personal experience?
So the way it works is, for example, if you just interview someone saying, I'm just going to give an example, right? Let's if you're a diabetic patient, a chronic diabetic patient, for example, I'm going to ask you, what are your, what's your life look like? You're going to talk to me about, I wake up in the morning, I do this, I go for my walk and I come back, I eat a meal, and then I go for another exercise. And if you're talking to someone who's in their 60s particularly, they would give you what their day looks like. They will talk to you about it. Now, on the hindsight, you visit them in their natural environment. You get to see their refrigerators, and you would get to see their medicine boxes. You would get to see things that are important for them, but actually they don't actually think about it. For example, chronic patients at 60, if you're 60 plus, you are more likely to have 20 to 30 medications. Now, it's important for you to think about, if you look at most of people, how they maintain medications, it's not organized in an appropriate way, where at each point in time, from morning, they might have like 6 to 10, afternoon, it's not even organized, it's all over, it's all put in one bag, most of the time, if you observe. Those little glances and gleans you will never get by doing, let me zoom you and talk to you about it. You would never get that. It always comes down to devil is in the detail when it comes to design. A successful design people are people who can extract these serendipities, these kind of moments into insights, and that's when you produce great products and services that people would have never even thought that they needed.
It's like, if you hadn't come here today, then you might have thought that we're quite slick in our production. Whereas by having come here, you've realised that's absolutely not the case. And our batteries ran out several times on the camera, and it's a real mess. But there we are. So no, that resonates. That makes a lot of sense, and I suppose that's why data is key. It doesn't just have to be data in a data model, a data set that you're taking insights from. It's the actual reality, because somebody's story can be rose tinted. It can negate facts. It can be in their own map of what's happening. What you're saying, by actually observing, watching, listening, then this is where the surprises come.
Yeah, that's qualitatively, right? So that's, again, I was earlier talking to you about qualitative and quantitative, right? So if you think about, you take these lean on qualitative analysis and insights, and then you put them into a machine of quantitative in terms of large data sets, then start testing at scale, and then that's when you get those results. Anyway, I'm digressing by saying that, but what I'm saying is coming back to the macro trend. So people, this is one of the trends that's going on. Another trend that
from that is the point, other than how you observe, which has been really useful to understand, is that are you looking at trying to help them organise the structuring of how they take medication, for instance?
Yeah, in for example, in this case, if you think about it now, a few years ago there was a particular product. No, it was a service which Amazon. I can't quite remember what that service was, but effectively Amazon actually purchased them last 2 or 3 years ago. Yes, I know, I remember. It's called Pillpack. So Pillpack was a service that came out of this sort of observation, right? So the way the service it works, it talks to your the service actually connects to your GP or your specialist doctors, and it also gleans to what your problems are from a medical records point of view, and then they package your monthly medication and sent off. And you get that home, sitting on your sofa, you get that. It's all pre-packed. Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, lunch, dinner, blah, blah, blah. It's all pre-packed. And all you need to do is you take that, you tear up, and you pop.
So I'm going to be really controversial here, as somebody who obviously has a lot of interest in bigging up the benefit of fintech, of which there's numerous applications that do that. But I feel like sometimes fintech sells itself on speed a little bit too much, because you give the example of applying for a mortgage taking 8 weeks. Okay, that's too long, but quite frankly, like, let's have a little bit of patience. This is a house I'm purchasing. Perhaps I can spend 2 weeks in my application process. It doesn't need to be 1 minute. Whereas when we talk about medication and when we talk about health, then this is imperative, that this is 100% efficient, that it is incredibly speedy, and that also, if somebody might not have the capabilities of thinking everything through themselves, then that is done for them. So, let's kind of embrace the work that's happening in this space right now, which is crucial. And I'd be keen to understand some of the other stuff you're seeing as well.
Yeah, I mean, so in terms of trends, we are talking about trends, right? That's one of the trends that I wanted to focus on. And the second trend that I'm seeing, or what I would suggest, is how can we help? People are fearful now at the moment. So when I say fearful, people are actually fearful even to step into a hospital environment, let alone anything. So that is a huge trend. So why there's fear? It's sort of obvious in some people's heads, but some people are wondering, why should we be fearful? We have to walk into a hospital. We shouldn't be fearful. In fact, that's a safe place, right? But what we are gleaning is that hospitals are a place actually where people are often getting infected. And then so the trend is that people want to avoid going to hospitals, which leads up to a trend that there's 6 months ago, when you were talking about telemedicine, people would be like, particularly in the industry experts or businesses or even doctors, and they would be like, no, there's no need for telemedicine. So for example, if you look at markets like Germany, adoption of telemedicine a year ago was very low, right? Now, if you think about it, in the last 4 weeks, adoption of telemedicine has gone up by 40%. And that's a huge trend.
Yeah.
And it's a positive trend, for example, in a way where how can we, how can we cut down on waiting time? You don't have to go in the hospitals and wait forever. And now that's a huge trend, and which is actually becoming a bigger, future way of doing it.
So, Gio, thanks. I know you can't go into too much detail, of course. It's part of the mystique of companies like McKinsey partner search, we have to, have some discretion. Just stepping up and outside and changing gears. You're a fascinating individual. What's some of the stuff that you're doing outside of work? You managing to keep sane outside of business? You've obviously just taken this really prominent role in a busy business at a busy time. What's going on?
Outside of work? Outside of work, I spend a lot of time with my wife and my 2-year-old son. He's just about to touch 2 years next month. So I'm really happy that I'm able to get that time with them. Usually I travel a lot, and there's a positive change that's happened. It's terrible to say that, but for me personally, there's a positive change that I'm able to spend more time at home now, which is quite nice. Outside of my busy business life, I tend to draw a lot. So I'm actually right now working on a graphic novel around how do you make Bible more accessible in a graphic sense. So it's a personal project that I started doing about 8 years ago, and I'm quite disciplined. I at least try and get one sort of one narrative illustrated in a month. So now I would confidently say I'm closing towards the end of whole book of Genesis. So the idea is to bring that into a book, and potentially if there are investors for an animation movie, I would love to get that. And it's a specific, unique style that I'm developing. And Genesis is as you know, it's quite a large book if you are familiar with it. I'm about 75% there. So my idea is by 2021, if I could get the book out, that's something that I do outside of my work.
That's why we asked the question, because it never stops surprising me how people who are so successful in busy jobs manage to be doing other incredible stuff. Is there anything that you've got that's shorter, where the audience, if they're interested, can visit and see your style and get them ready for the movie?
I think there's a blog called projectbaselal.com. Around that, there's a blog there. You can search Jyothish Nair Project Baselal. The project, it's called Project Baselal, Bezalel, Project Baselal. So you can search and you will see live version of what I'm doing. And reach out to me if you have any questions around that.
I'll do that, and we'll put that link in the show notes.
Genesis is my favorite actually part of the Bible. There's we can think about the story about 7 skinny cows and 7 fat cows. So we'll get over the crisis hopefully soon. And that's a good thing that it comes back. So there will be a good thing. But going back to the COVID, I just wanted to ask about the future as well. So the 7 fat cows now. How do you see the future of actually consulting? Because you said that you used to travel a lot, and I did see a good thing in consultants being on site, because that's how you do, at least like when you said ethnographical research, when you observe the users. So also the consultant, when they go into the client, they observe how the clients are working, and that's how they can actually help better. So Big 3, even Big 4 plus Accenture, everyone is working on site, and hence they're charging so much money, and they're so actually good. So how do you see now McKinsey? Are you guys going to fly that much, and how do you think it would affect your performance by just working from home?
Definitely, I would talk about myself right now. Right, in the last 4 months, we have managed to do the same impactful work staying at home. And when I say home, remote working. So to your point, ethnography can be done remotely as long as you pre-prepare some of the questions up front, and then you also get consent from people, the relevant consent that you need to get. For example, earlier we talked about the notion of medication and all of that, and refrigerator. You can't just barge into someone's life and say, show me your refrigerator, but upfront you kind of work with research agencies who give you the candidates whom you want to go speak and meet and kind of glean for insights. you get relevant consents upfront, and then while you're on the Zoom, you actually make sure your Zoom materials and tools are absolutely in place so that the other person who's talking to you also has good internet connection. Good, if it's not underground where, suddenly the person is talking to you, but then by the time they walk into the kitchen to show you a refrigerator, the whole, the internet fades off. Making sure those basic things are in place. And then we are still doing it, and we are quite successful in it. And so from a future work standpoint, my view is there will always be a healthy balance now moving forward. It may not probably be always just go physically be in that location, and that's my suspicion. And clearly, we've kind of proven the point that we can all still deliver, not just us, right? Across the world, if you look at all types of jobs, but maybe to your own self, to your own, the way you operate, the whole operating model has changed in the last four months. So I do suspect, and I do feel like, we can still deliver the same impactful work remotely. And where it is absolutely crucial, we may have to, based on the government guidelines and so on and so forth, we may have to, take it by one step at a time and look at those and then plan, I guess.
Gio, this has been a really great showcase, as we suspected it would be. I think quite counter to a profile that you'd expect from McKinsey if you just think of the reputation. This is what we wanted to show. This is what the whole podcast is about. For somebody to be doing such creative work at a business like McKinsey, where economics and art are fusing, is just fantastic to see. Clearly full of passion, got loads of mana. I'm sure you're going to be incredibly successful moving forward, and we'll keep an eye on you. But certainly from my perspective, I'd just like to say thanks for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Lloyd. Thank you. Thank you for inviting, and I'm looking forward to taking this relationship on further and meeting you guys more often.